Midnight News coming to you live from Algiers with me, Mariam Zian, to the headlines. Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune presides over the African Peer Review Mechanism Summit in Addis Ababa, highlighting the new African Credit Rating Agency as a key milestone, while African leaders praise Algeria's role in the continent's development. Coming up next, Al-Qassam brigades will release 3 Israeli hostages on Saturday. Hundreds of U.S. lawmakers strongly condemn President Trump's displacement plan, and Israeli occupation launches a series of raids in various areas of occupied Palestine. And also tonight, a flurry of diplomatic statements on Ukraine. Washington weighs its options and the EU reaffirms support for Kiev. Hello and welcome to the details of our program. At the outset, Algerian President Mr. Abdelmadjid Tebboune has chaired the 34th summit of the Heads of State and Government of the African Peer Review Mechanism on Friday, the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa. Several heads of state and government participated along with officials from various AU institutions. On the Algerian side, members of the government delegation attended, including Algeria's permanent representative to the UN, Ammar Ben Jama, and its ambassador to Ethiopia, Selma Malika Haddadi. Tebboune has led the APRM forum since February 2024. President Tebboune emphasized that the 34th session of the APRM Forum comes amid significant challenges in deepening the foundations of prosperity in Africa. In his opening remarks, he stressed that the APRM has become crucial in promoting good governance and fostering stability, asserting that it is not merely a formal framework.
يسرني ويشرفني أن أخاطب هذا الجمع الموقر في لقاء يعكس التزامنا الراسخ بمسيرة قارتنا نحو تعزيز مبادئ الحوكمة الرشيدة والتنمية المستدامة. إن اجتماعنا اليوم يأتي في ظرف دقيق تتزايد فيه التحديات أمام الحكم الرشيد في إفريقيا، مما يجعل قمتنا هاته محطة أساسية لتعزيز العمل المشترك وتعزيز وتعميق أسس الاستقرار والازدهار في قارتنا. إن اجتماعنا اليوم بالحضور المباشر يعكس قناعتنا بأن الآلية الإفريقية لتقييم من قبل النظراء هي أداة أساسية لتحقيق أهداف أجندة 2063، فلقد صارت آلية هامة لتعزيز ثقافة الحكم الراشد، وأكدت بتجربتها خلال السنوات الأخيرة أنها ليست مجرد إطار شكلي، بل هي أداة فعالة لمراجعة السياسات وتعزيز الإصلاحات الهيكلية تدفع إلى الاستقرار والتنمية في قارتنا.
President Tebboune reaffirmed Algeria's commitment to actively addressing current challenges, particularly in upholding the rule of law, combating corruption, and enhancing social justice and human rights.
وأود هنا أن أؤكد مجددا التزام الجزائر كدولة مؤسسة لهذه الآلية بالحرص على تفعيل دورها في مواجهة التحديات الراهنة، لا سيما فيما يتعلق بترسيخ سيادة القانون ومكافحة الفساد وتعزيز العدالة الاجتماعية وحقوق الإنسان، وهي تحديات تفرض علينا العمل بروح من التضامن والمسؤولية لتجاوز الصعوبات المالية التي تحد من قدرة الآلية الإفريقية للتقييم من قبل النظراء على تحقيق الأهداف السامية التي أنشئت من أجلها.
He also pointed out that the APRM faces financial constraints that hinder its operations and the implementation of its programs, calling on member states to fulfill their financial commitments according to their capacities.
إن الوضع المالي الحرج الذي تواجهه هذه الآلية الإفريقية يشكل عائقا حقيقيا أمام استدامة عملها، لتأخر بعض الدول عن دفع مساهمتها، مما أثر على تنفيذ برامجها وأنشطتها. ولذلك فإني أدعو أشقائنا الدول الأعضاء إلى الوفاء بالتزاماتهما المالية، سواء عبر تسوية المستحقات المتأخرة أو تقديم مساهمة طوعية وفقا لقدرات كل دولة.
The Algerian president announced that Algeria would voluntarily contribute $1 million to the APRM to help drive and implement its programs. Let's take a listen.
وانطلاقا من التزام الجزائر بدعم الآلية وتمكينها من أداء مهامها، قررت بلادي تقديم مساهمة طوعية بقيمة $1,000,000 أمريكي لدعم عملية التقييم وتنفيذ التوصيات المنبثقة عنها.
President Tebboune affirmed Algeria's continued support for the APRM and its role within the African Union.
إن اجتماعنا اليوم يشكل محطة أساسية لتعزيز دور الآلية الإفريقية كإطار فاعل لترقية الحوكمة ومواصلة العمل لإيجاد حلول مستدامة للتحديات التي نواجهها وتواجهها دول القارة. فمن خلال التزامنا الجماعي سنتمكن من إرساء مؤسسات قادرة على تحقيق التنمية المتوازنة وضمان رفاهية شعوبنا. وفي الأخير أجدد التأكيد بأن الجزائر ستظل شريكا فاعلا في دعم هذه الآلية وتعزيز مكانتها داخل الاتحاد الإفريقي، وأدعو الدول الأعضاء إلى العمل على توحيد جهودنا لتحقيق أهدافنا المشتركة النبيلة.
And before chairing the session, President Tebboune held meetings with several African leaders. Let's take a look. President Tebboune praised the creation of the African Rating Agency, stating that it could contribute to Africa's economy. In a speech on the sidelines of the AU summit in Addis Ababa, Tebboune emphasized that the world recognizes Africa as the future and described the agency's establishment as a step toward credibility and progress. And Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed extended a particularly warm welcome to President Tebboune ahead of their bilateral talks. In a remarkable gesture, Abiy Ahmed personally drove the car that transported Tebboune to the venue of the discussions. African diplomats commended Algeria's continuous efforts to advance the continent, describing its relations with African nations as strong. And on the sidelines of the APRM forum, they emphasized that President Tebboune's leadership of the summit provides a strong impetus for adapting the forum's recommendations and achieving its objectives.
The Diplomatic Institute here in Algeria has allowed us as diplomats from African countries to meet in a brotherly manner. It has taught us and enriched us. We have learnt about Algeria's vision towards the African continent regarding security and peace. We were also made aware of Algeria's active role in establishing peace and security and in combating terrorism on the African continent.
Personally, I have learned a lot, and the same applies to my colleagues. We believe that what we have gained here enables us to do a lot to implement in our countries in order to achieve ideological, economic, and political independence in Africa.
The African Union Summit is set to feature leadership renewals within its commission. Algeria has nominated Ambassador Selma Malika Haddadi, its representative in Addis Ababa, and to the AU for the vice presidency. The elections conducted by secret ballot require a two-thirds majority. Algeria is also poised to secure a seat on the AU Peace and Security Council in next month's postponed vote, having already secured 30 of the required 33 votes. On the eve of the AU summit, Algeria reiterated its stance that working within the AU framework, free from external interference, is key to addressing Africa's challenges. More with Hussein Barkan.
Believing in the ability of Africa's sons and daughters to rise to the challenge, Algeria continues its struggle to strengthen the continent's role, which has suffered from various forms of injustice and marginalization within numerous international organizations, particularly the United Nations Security Council. Algeria remains committed to working within the frameworks of the African Union to revive the African spirit that once succeeded in expelling colonial powers and continues to resist all forms of foreign intervention and neocolonialism. This commitment extends to reinforcing Africa's economic and financial sovereignty, safeguarding the continent's right to control its own resources and decisions, rights earned through a long struggle and shared resistance against colonial forces that now seeks to divide Africa into spheres of influence and sow discord within the African family. It is the legitimate right of Africans in their summit and gatherings to advocate for the criminalization of colonialism in all its forms and to demand recognition of the immense suffering they have endured, suffering that cannot be erased by the passage of time. Rooted in its African identity and committed to joint action, Algeria continues its continental diplomatic efforts based on a well-established approach that prioritizes security, peace, and development. This approach acknowledges the root causes of the threat facing the continent, upholds national sovereignty, and reject any form of external interference under any pretext. Because effective participation in strengthening African cooperation can only be achieved through the mechanism of the African Union, Algeria reaffirmed its commitment to contributing to the collective agenda aimed at peace, stability, integration, and shared prosperity.
The national flag of Algeria.
These convictions are reflected in Algeria's diplomatic efforts and initiatives within Africa, demonstrating an unwavering dedication to strengthening the AU's institutions. The Oran process, through its high-level conference on peace and security in Africa, has provided another strategic African platform for exploring African solutions to African crises, free from all forms of foreign intervention.
The Secretary General of Algeria's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Lounes Magraman, presided over the certificate awarding ceremony for the second training session organized by the Institute of Diplomacy and International Relations. The program, designed for African diplomats accredited in Algeria, was supported by the Arab Fund for Technical Assistance to African countries under the Arab League. A statement from Algeria's Foreign Ministry highlighted the initiative as part of ongoing efforts to strengthen cooperation with African partners, particularly in training, capacity building, and knowledge exchange.
This diplomatic training comes as a significant and effective addition to your professional development, aiming to enhance your skills and focus your experiences in a way that contributes to optimal engagement and wise handling of the dynamics of international relations. It will help you extract effective mechanisms that align with the various challenges and stakes facing our African continent.
And decades after France's nuclear tests in Algerian desert, the scars of colonialism remain. And Algeria continues to demand recognition, accountability, and justice for the lasting devastation. But will the international community heed the call to criminalize colonialism? More with Usama Ayat.
Algeria has consistently called for the criminalization of colonialism, particularly in light of the lasting impact of France's colonial rule, including the devastating effects of nuclear tests conducted in the Sahara Desert during the 1960s. While commemorating these nuclear tests, Algeria often reiterates its demand for recognition, accountability, and compensation for the harm caused by such crimes.
In response to popular Algerian demand, the file of criminalizing colonialism will be opened in the Algerian National Popular Assembly, and it will take its natural path, and we will trial for the rights of our martyrs and the rights of the victims of these experiments. And we will continue on this path because it is a trust, and we will never give up on commitment towards our people and our martyrs and towards all the victims who are still suffering until this day.
France conducted 17 nuclear tests in Algeria between 1960 and 1966, with the first bomb code-named Gerboise Bleu, detonated on February 13, 1960, near the southern region of Regain. These tests caused significant environmental damage and long-term health repercussions for local populations, many of whom were exposed to radiation without their knowledge nor consent.
The mapping established by the French Ministry of Defense in 2014 indicates that several African regions have been affected by nuclear radiation, affecting more than 13 countries, including the Northern Sahara and the explosion zones, whether they are located in the north, south, east, or west. The effects of this radiation have been gone beyond the Mediterranean Sea.
Algeria has used the memory of these events to highlight the broader injustices of colonialism, calling on the international community to recognize colonialism as a crime against humanity. This demand aligns with Algeria's broader efforts to address historical grievances and seek justice for the atrocities committed during the colonial era. The call for criminalizing colonialism is part of a global movement to reckon with the legacies of imperialism, including exploitation, violence, and systemic oppression. Algeria's stance on this issue is particularly relevant given its history of resistance to French colonialism and its ongoing efforts to address the consequences of that era.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres on Friday called for an end to the flow of weapons into Sudan, warning that the situation in the country represents an unprecedented humanitarian crisis in Africa. Speaking at a humanitarian conference on Sudan held on the sidelines of the African Union Summit in Ethiopia, Guterres stressed the need to protect civilians, facilitate humanitarian aid delivery, and stop arms smuggling.
Civilians, including humanitarian workers, must be protected. Rapid, safe, unhindered, and sustained humanitarian access must be facilitated in all areas of need. At this blessed time for peace, compassion, giving, and solidarity, I urge all of you to use your tremendous leverage for good.
African Union Commission Chairperson Moussa Faki stated that the Sudanese people have the right to live in peace and stability without foreign interference. He described a ceasefire as the first step towards a comprehensive political dialogue.
The situation and the continued refusal by those waging this enforced global conflict to release Sudan from war and the continued fracture is one of the greatest moral and political failures of all time. I therefore reiterate yet again for the Sudanese armed forces, the rapid support forces, and their allies to immediately and unconditionally embrace a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire.
The United Nations reported that nearly 30 million people in Sudan require humanitarian assistance due to the ongoing war and increase in displacement. Edmore Todonhalna, Deputy Director of the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in Sudan, said that around 70% of those affected by the conflict, including internally displaced persons, are women and girls, urging the international community to provide the necessary humanitarian funding. Chairman of Sudan's Sovereign Council General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan reaffirmed that the Sudanese armed forces will not abandon those who fought alongside them. In a speech in Omdurman, Burhan stated that all Sudanese citizens would be included in any future political project, with no one being excluded.
All Sudanese people are fighting with us today. The military, popular resistance, civil support, resistance movements, all Sudanese people are lining up behind the Sudanese armed forces to fight this rebellion.
The African Union office has resumed operations from its headquarters in the Libyan capital, Tripoli, after a 10-year hiatus. Libya's acting Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Tahir al-Bahour, signed an agreement with AU Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security, Bankole Adeoye, to host the office in Tripoli. According to Libya's Foreign Ministry, the reopening of the AU office in Tripoli affirms the security and stability the country is experiencing. And to developments in occupied Palestine, Al-Qassam Brigades announced that it would release 3 Israeli hostages on Saturday as part of the 6th batch in the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire agreement. In a Telegram post, the Al-Qassam Brigade's military spokesperson revealed the names of the hostages to be freed: Sasha Alexander Trubnikov, Sagi Dekelhan, and Yair Horn. Two Palestinian children were killed on Thursday evening, one by Israeli forces and the other in an explosion from unexploded ordnance left behind from Israel's war on Gaza. According to local Palestinian sources, 15-year-old Anas Sakir Ahmed al-Nabhin was shot and killed by Israeli forces north of Al-Bureij refugee camp in central Gaza. Meanwhile, 14-year-old Hamouda Ala Saoud was killed in an explosion from a suspected war remnant in a Nusayrat refugee camp. Hundreds of U.S. lawmakers have strongly condemned President Donald Trump's plan to relocate Gaza's population and place the territory under U.S. control. According to local media sources, more than 145 Democratic members of the House of Representatives urged Trump to retract his statements, calling the proposal not only unethical, but also damaging to the U.S. international reputation. Israeli occupation forces launched a series of raids early Friday across multiple areas in the occupied West Bank. According to local Palestinian sources, Israeli forces stormed the residential building in the Rafidiyah area west of Nablus, as well as Askar refugee camp east of the city. They also raided several homes and carried out incursions in the towns of Jabba and Beir el-Basha in Jenin. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, has accused Israel of turning its health centers into detention facilities for Palestinian detainees. In a statement on Friday, UNRWA reported that Israeli forces had used one of its health centers in Al-Harub refugee camp near Beit Lahiya for detaining Palestinians arrested in the camp. The agency condemned this as a blatant violation of UN premises. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has stated that all options remain on the table to end the war in Ukraine, including military pressure. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal published on Friday, Vance said the U.S. will impose sanctions on Russia and may take military action if Russia and President Vladimir Putin refuses a peace deal with Ukraine.
We're, of course, pleased to be joined by the delegation from NATO. Of course, we're going to talk about NATO, in particular the President's desire to see NATO spend a little bit more resources on defense. And I know that's something Secretary General Rudda agrees with me on. We're going to talk, of course, about the Ukraine-Russia conflict and how to bring it to a negotiated settlement.
The European Union, for its part, has reiterated its commitment to supporting Ukraine until it achieves what it calls a just peace with strong security guarantees. Speaking at the 61st Munich Security Conference, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called for accelerating Ukraine's accession to the EU, emphasizing that Kiev's future lies within the European family. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky claimed on Friday that a Russian drone targeted a storage facility at the Chernobyl nuclear plant overnight, accusing Russian President Vladimir Putin of continuing to deceive the world. He called for a unified international response to hold Russia accountable. And as a response, the Kremlin dismissed the allegations as a provocation, with spokesperson Dmitry Peskov stating that Russian forces would not carry out such an act. Peskov also accused Ukraine of obstructing peace efforts, claiming that elements within Kiev's leadership were deliberately preventing negotiations. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a wrap for tonight's program. Our platforms and news websites remain available for you. And thank you for watching. See you on Tuesday.